Welcome to the Rock and Roll Show podcast. We're here to share the magic of experiencing music together with strangers and with friends, and to get to know our guests a little bit better through their experiences with music of all kinds. I'm your host, Alex Gadd, and I relate to people best when talking about music, finding out how someone got into music, how listening to and making music helped shape who that person is today. All of that allows us to get to know and understand one another better. Today, we're welcoming Diane Allen to the show. Diane is an international speaker, violinist, author, and is a global authority on the flow state. Her work is focused on empowering people to get into their flow state, and she wrote a book called Flow, Unlock Your Genius, Love What You Do, which is out now. She's a TEDx speaker. She's been featured on all four of the major television networks, and we're thrilled to have her joining us today. Diane, welcome.
Thank you so much. My idea of fun.
Thank you very much for joining us. And usually I like to start off just by finding out how our guests got exposure to music for the first time, your earliest memories of music and how it first impacted you.
Well, I grew up where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame exists in Cleveland, Ohio. And while Cleveland has a reputation of being, you know, not that favorable, it was actually an incredibly rich cultural location. There's like a world famous art museum. The Cleveland Orchestra is in like one of the top 5 orchestras of the world. There's a Shakespeare festival that John Lithgow's father ran. And when I heard how I learned that it was John Lithgow's father, because I heard John, it was an interview, and he was saying that he used to be like some of the people who would have the minor roles in the back, like a guard holding a sword or, something like that.
Extras. Yeah.
And so my mom, I think she was the one who instigated it, but my dad was, happy to follow along. And she took us to everything, whether it was the Shakespeare plays or the art museum or the Cleveland Orchestra. I was so little that I would sit in the chairs and they would fold up on me, right? And my feet would be swinging. So, she just was like always getting us out there and exposing us to all kinds of things. WMMS, for those of you who know,
Right
is
on.
is the radio that played all the rock. I remember growing up with my transistor radio with the one earplug.
Oh, yeah. I had one too.
That's the culture that I grew up in. They don't do this too much anymore, but we had music education in elementary school. We had a little orchestra, right?
Hmm.
Which fed into the junior high, which fed into the high school. And I know, colleagues of mine are teachers in the school systems, and they say it's brutal when you don't have people starting out younger, right? It's difficult to build a high school orchestra if you don't have a long feet. Anyways, I'm getting a little sidetracked, but my mom, again, I have to attribute to her. If she had known about this thing called the Suzuki method to teach young children how to play the violin, I'm sure she would have adopted it because it was just starting out at Oberlin College in Ohio at that time. And if she had known, I bet she would have taken me, because I chose the violin. It's something I wanted to play. And because, she asked, "What do you want to play?" And all the teachers wouldn't take anybody until they were 8 years old. But Suzuki teachers will take them as, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. So, I started on piano because, she knew of a piano teacher who would take a 6-year-old, and then, as soon as I was 8, it was all violin.
Now, what drew you to the violin for the first time at such a young age?
Yeah, so, you and I talked about this really incredible concert. Once again, Severance Hall, it is stunning. We were sitting pretty high up, and there's something about being in the back of of the top, the high area, right? And we were way up high. And what happens is that the sound from it just accumulates way up high. And it's a really intense experience. A lot of times when you're sitting up front, the sound is just going right over your head, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
we were at that spot where like everything just came. um, straight up. If you imagine like a whoosh of wind, right, coming up,
Hmm.
carrying all that sound. And I'm little with my feet dangling, and it was Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet, and it was hair raising. It was just so intense. I felt like I was being pinned to the back of the chair, the force of it. And it was around that time. I don't remember, it was exactly at that concert when my mom leaned over and she said, "What instrument do you want to play?" And I loved the violins for two reasons. You could see the coordinated bows going up and down. And there was something about the incredible high notes that would cut through all of the other sound that you could always hear those high notes. And I just thought that was really cool. So that was basically it.
Well, you want to be heard. Every little kid wants to be heard. You
Oh,
know,
that's hilarious.
that's how I relate to it. I had very similar experiences. I got taken to rock concerts very young, and because my family was involved in the music business, and yes, also sitting too close to the stage at any concert is terrible because you hear only the music that's closest to you, the noise that's closest to you. Whereas if you sit further back, you hear the full mix,
Yeah.
which someone is being paid a lot of money to do a good job mixing and making
Yeah.
sure the audience can hear it. If you sit too close, you don't always get that. But I also just wanted to be heard. And I felt like, yeah, the guitar is the easiest way to be heard because that's the featured instrument in a band. And I feel like you were at, and we'll get to this in greater detail, but is the violin the featured instrument in an orchestra usually?
You
This is
know,
asking because of ignorance. I don't know.
oh yeah, they're the heavy lifters.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny if you have an orchestra score for a symphony. Uh, there might be 46, 48 pages in a violin score, but like the tuba score will have one page. And yeah, it's a definitely a strong melodic, you know,
Yeah. I would think so.
you know feature of the orchestra.
Sure.
And yeah, there's two sections of violin. There's second section, they do more of harmony, and violas, more harmony. Cello, they're like the bass line.
Hmm.
And but they also kind of have, take on a lot of melodies. So like, yeah, I don't know, kind of gets passed around.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, so you see Romeo and Juliet, you're blown away by this performance. How did you then start transitioning from piano to violin lessons? Was that in school or did you take private lessons?
It was private lessons.
Okay,
Uh, you know, in downtown, there's like a whole cultural area where the art museum is right across the street from Severance Hall, which is where the orchestra concerts were. This is all on Case Western Reserve University campus. The Cleveland Institute of Music is also in that area. And behind, a block behind the Cleveland Institute of Music, is the Cleveland Music School settlement. It was this giant mansion that was transformed into a music school. And so, the ballroom would be where we would have our recitals, right?
sure.
And the second floor had all the big bedrooms, and that's where all the pianos were. Violin, I had to walk over to this area with this narrow staircase. It was the servants' quarters. This tiny little room the size of a closet, and that's where I would have my violin lessons. And, as soon as I started at 8 years old, I was done with the piano.
It is rare when a child says, I'm interested in something, and yet that becomes their life's passion and their work. I mean, I was interested in baseball. I didn't become a baseball player. I was interested in rock and roll music, and this is as close as I've gotten to rock and roll music, except playing in some cover band. You
Yeah.
actually made it work. So you started 8 as a violin student. I assume you played throughout high school. Were you the best violin player in your high school?
No. I
Okay.
mean, keep in mind, I am not a child prodigy. I am just somebody who happened to be playing the violin, and my story is really not sexy in any way. It is just like it was something I did. It was something I kept doing. I enjoyed it. And when you got to that time in high school when they're looking at career counseling, I remember thinking, I wonder if there's, if I should look into music therapy. Like, I don't even know why I thought that. Um, and and I just don't even know why. And then I changed to a different school and, got to that point where it's like, okay, well, you have to pick a major or, whatever, where are you focusing? And I was like, well, I like playing the violin. I mean, it was really there was nothing else really calling to me.
Hmm.
Um, I just was like, well, I like playing the violin. So I think it was my senior year when I was like, okay, let's do this. But because I had had consistent training, at that point I was living in Philadelphia, and there was this tiny little music school, the Philadelphia College of Performing Arts, and they had a tiny little high school branch. And so for my senior year, I, along with 13 other students, went to school there, but I took all freshman classes at the college. And I was like, okay, yeah, this feels like it. So I was able to not go and pay college tuition to find out. I was lucky enough to be able to figure that out when I was a senior in high school.
Sure. So then study through college, you study violin.
Yes, I went to Peabody Conservatory, which is now under the umbrella of Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore.
Okay.
And after 2 years of that and a very grumpy violin teacher, there were two violin teachers at that school. They were really competitive with each other. They used the students to pit against each other. It was a really toxic environment. I went to Manhattan School of Music in New York, and had a phenomenal teacher. And then when I was done in New York, I went back to the Cleveland area and did my grad degree didn't have to pay for it. It was a teaching assistantship and got my Master of Music.
Amazing. Where was your first professional job playing the violin?
While I was in New York,
Hmm.
there's all kinds of freelance work,
Sure.
right? And so, I was doing like, oh, I can't remember. There was this opera company that would do obscure operas, and I played for them frequently. My favorite gig, though, you ready for this?
Ready.
St. Patrick's Cathedral, St. Patrick's Day, and
Sounds
yes,
pretty good.
the priests were really smashed.
But look, you have a guaranteed audience. You're going to play for thousands of people. That's amazing.
It was. It's an amazing building to play
Oh,
music in,
yeah,
when you're yeah, the way it's set, that it's just a natural acoustic, instrument in itself, right?
sure.
Yeah.
So you played there during your studies,
Yeah.
and then before your graduate degree, you had played professionally. That's pretty neat.
Yes. So lots of freelance work, and I started teaching at school. A friend of mine had the job and she was done with it and she said, "Here, why don't you do this?" So that's when I started teaching. So I think it was around 25 or 24 when I started teaching violin,
Wow.
and I taught for 28 years. So when I was in Cleveland, back to Cleveland for master's degree at University of Akron, I did a lot of freelance orchestras, and my husband, who plays the bass, we would joke that why did we buy a house? Because it would have been better to have an RV. But anyways, from our house, 2 hours in any direction, you could get to a freelance orchestra. So we were what we call the freeway philharmonic. You're
That's that.
commuting and playing, and yeah, so we were playing a lot of orchestral, um, it's just all orchestral stuff. Then a friend of ours told us about the Brit Festival, which is in Southern Oregon, and it's an outdoor amphitheater they had a 3-week orchestra festival. And so my husband and I, we auditioned and we came out to Oregon. And in the orchestra was, oh, why am I blanking on his name right now? Oh, it'll come to me. Dave. His name is Dave. Can't remember his last name. Dave also played bass in the orchestra. His father was the bass trombonist in the Cleveland Orchestra. So when we're out at the Brit Festival, we were performing Prokofiev and Juliet. And I went up to Dave and I said, I remember when I was little hearing this at Severance Hall and it was hair raising. And he said, yes, I was there too. He
Wow.
said it was the first time they had a new conductor. His name was Lauren Mazel, and it was his first recording. And he was preparing the orchestra for their first recording. They were doing these concerts in preparation of the recording. And he said he remembers it well. It was that special. It wasn't just me being, young and impressionable. It really was
Sure.
like a spectacular thing. And so that was such an amazing full circle moment for me. And,
Really?
it's just kind of funny because my husband, who also grew up in Cleveland, while I was doing all this classical music stuff, he was going to hear Kiss at the Coliseum and, hearing all of the rock and roll stuff that was coming out in the 70s that I never went to any of those. Just wasn't interested.
That was gonna be one of my follow-up questions is where does pop music come into your life and in any way affect how your ear hears music or how you think about music?
Yeah. It was just there was so many decades of classical music.
Sure.
Um, and
Centuries.
I didn't really yeah, I know, centuries, right? I didn't really pay attention to, that much. I remember things because maybe my mom liked them. Yeah, I remember when Al Jarreau came out. He was amazing. I remember when, Bobby McFerrin came out. I heard
Sure.
him at Carnegie Hall when I was going to school there, and oh my gosh, it was incredible. Um, and what else do I remember that even sticks out? Not much. Of course, I remember Michael Jackson because it was just
Yeah, it was
he
a
was
phenomenon.
he was just you couldn't not notice Michael Jackson, right? Because of
Right.
what he was doing. It was just so amazing. But I really I have major, major, major gaps in my what was going on in pop music uh, because I was so, so, so dedicated to my studies. We took a trip last yeah, it was just last March to Nashville. We'd never been to Nashville before. And we went to Nashville and we went to hear the Wood Brothers, which, I've heard a few times. Pat Metheny,
Yeah.
right, is a great
Sure.
favorite. But we're in Nashville and so we picked out some things and there was this one night where we had a blank spot. We were planning and my husband was looking around and he says, listen to this band. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it felt like a risk. All right, well, let's buy tickets. Let's just go. It kind of felt like a risk, and we're like, all right, we'll go if we after 3 songs. We'll just leave. So we get there. It's one of these, tight, tight venues where you can only stand and you're a sardine can and the opening band was not good. Then the main band comes out. I'm leaving the reveal, right? Do you notice
Yes, I'm
that the
anxious.
main band comes out? Similar experience to hearing Prokofiev and Juliet, like pinned by the power of it. Just it was so good. It was the loudest concert I've ever been to, but it was the best loud I've ever heard. It was really, really good. I was telling my husband, I said, if you're deaf, this is a concert to come to because you were feeling everything. Like my whole rib cage was, becoming a musical instrument. Anyways, it was Dirty Loops. Do you know Dirty Loops?
I do not, but this
You
is why I
have,
do this podcast. I
you
wanna
have,
learn about new music. I'm gonna check
oh
them out.
my gosh, Dirty Loops. blew me away. I can't stop listening to them. They are amazing. A year before, we did a New York trip, and it's because I wanted to hear Jacob Collier live.
Hmm.
And he was doing a concert with Maddie Cunningham and Chris Thile. So uh, that was just the most amazing concert because those three people are just so grounded in humanity. And it was like the two of us were just sitting there with tears streaming down our eyes because it was so, you know, touching and amazing. That was at uh, Lincoln Center. It was amazing, the acoustics.
Oh, good.
It was absolutely stunning.
Push your car from the road. Push your car from the road. River of orchids winding away. To walk into London on my hands one day. River of orchids, the road overflows. Won't you walk into London smelling like a bedroom rose? Just like a mad dog chasing your tail in a circle. Just like a mad dog chasing your tail in a circle.
All right. I have one question that I like to ask the few people I've had on who are violin players. What's the difference between a violin and a fiddle?
Oh, it's a style of playing.
Just style.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you find any affinity for fiddle players in country music?
I so appreciate it. We went to hear, oh gosh, here's another name. Oh my gosh. They play every Monday night in Nashville and it's a bunch of session players. They've been playing this gig for decades. And um, a lot of them are grand old Opry session people and
Sure.
oh, I so we it was so
Yeah.
enjoyable to hear that kind of music played so well.
Hmm.
And I appreciate it for what it is. It's not something I'm interested in learning, but
Got it.
super appreciate it
Got
for
it.
what it is.
Now, you mentioned Oregon. At some point, you became not just a member of their orchestra, but the concertmaster of their
Yep.
orchestra. Tell me a little bit about that. How did that come about?
So my husband and I, as I mentioned, were commuting once a year out to Oregon to play in the Brit Festival. And we fell in love with Oregon. It's stunning out here.
Yes.
The Freeway Philharmonic takes a lot of time out of your day. A
Out
lot
of
of
your year,
pavement.
I would imagine.
Yeah, just constantly driving. And uh, so I had seen this is back in the day when there were still print magazines. I guess there's still magazines now, but there was a Suzuki violin magazine or Suzuki teaching magazine. And just so people know, Suzuki is a master teacher who figured out how to teach students at a very young age and was able to gift the process to people. It's known for get a bad rap for people playing like um, robots. Just kind of playing the notes and they don't know how to read music. They do it all by ear. Nothing wrong with that. But anyways, uh, it was like a huge contribution to the advancement of music. And so, in my experience in college, every year I was in college, as I advanced, the newest freshman group that came in played better than the previous freshman. You could see, and it's never stopped. Like the quality of teaching just has constantly been on an upward trend, which is why you have so many virtuosos these days, so many people who have such facility when you see these, 8-year-old bass players playing on Instagram and stuff, right? And they're rocking
Hmm.
it. And um, I witnessed seeing that happening, the advancement of teaching. And so anyway, so there was this magazine for the Suzuki method, and they had ads in there 3 years in a row going out to Brit. I kept seeing that they had a teaching job in Bend, Oregon. I was pregnant, and my husband was running around that year taking as many orchestra auditions as he could. And he's like, if I don't get in this year, I'm done. And, he really tried to make it happen. And then he was like, yeah, I really am done. So my son was 6 weeks old. We got on an airplane. They flew us out to Bend, Oregon. I auditioned. I spent the whole day teaching in front of a large room full of people, and the conductor of the orchestra was there. And by the end of the day, I had not only a teaching job, but an orchestra job. Yeah.
Tell me the name of the orchestra again. I'm sorry.
It's not even like a big orchestra. It's the Central Oregon Symphony. And for those of you who are looking at this, what I'm doing is I'm holding up a picture of the orchestra I used to play in. And there I am. I'm second in command to the conductor. And so I was in the hot seat, right? If I was
Sure.
having a good day or a bad day, that would ripple effect throughout the orchestra. So I had to be at the top of my game. I always had to play my best. And because we're talking about music, right? It's not just if you think about playing the violin, it's supposed to be one of the hardest instruments to learn. Um, there's an athletic part, right? Musicians are athletes, right? You
An
have to,
endurance part for sure.
right? So, but then you're expected to interpret the music, right? And to give the audience a transformational experience, right?
Sure.
So that's, at the intersection of intellect and heart, right? And so when you are in that heart space, right? When you're getting into the music, you are getting into what's scientifically called your flow state.
Hmm.
And when you are coming from a deep sense of purpose and you're pouring your heart into it, whatever however you want to call it, right? You're igniting the 40,000 neurons in your heart. And when that happens, so the electromagnetic field of the heart is actually 60% greater than the electromagnetic field of the brain. Okay. And so when you are exuding your energy through your heart, it reaches out 3 feet all around you. And so all of the people around you in your 3 foot circumference, they sense that and they sing. It's so much easier to get into the music if somebody else next to you is getting into it, right?
Sure.
If there's one person who's not, they're just playing the notes, like, yeah, that does not feel good at all, right?
Right. That drags everybody down.
It drags everyone down. So in my leadership role, I knew that if I could lead myself to get into flow, that it would impact everybody around me. Now they're leading that, they've got their 3 foot circles, right? Now
Sure.
people around them sense it. It just becomes this giant ripple effect. Now the audience, the audience is getting engaged, right?
Just like
So
you did in back in Cleveland when you were
yes,
a
when I
kid.
was in the audience,
Yes.
absolutely.
Right.
So, in corporate world, they call that team synergy, right? But we call it group flow.
I like that better. I like group flow much better.
And I would just be so moved, especially during audience sing-alongs, because you'd have a choir squished on stage behind the orchestra, and then you'd have the house lights up and the whole audience. You've got, a couple, 3,000 people and out there singing. Um, I would be on stage. I'd have to turn my head sideways for the tears to roll down my face because there's something about unifying people through music that just cuts me straight to the core, right?
Me too.
So, yeah, so the flow state is a big deal. And so the in my role as the concertmaster, I had a lot of different things that I did. One of which was I had to lead a small group of musicians to do cultural outreach concerts. And
Okay.
so we were at one of these events, like we're at this tiny little kind of farming community. There was, 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, matinee. We're at like a town hall kind of place, community center. Nothing to be nervous about here, right? And I had fallen in love with public speaking. And this is like late in my career with the Central Oregon Symphony. And I took flow for granted, right? It's just, yeah, you get on stage and it's there. You just get into the music. Done. So we're at this event and I get this idea. I'm like, I love public speaking. Why don't I do both? Speak to the audience and I'll play the violin. Why not? Right. So without any preparation, I just spontaneously go up there. I give a pre concert lecture, having a great time, turn around, sit down, give a big cue for the music to start. Alex, my elbows were frozen. Like
Mm,
it was the weirdest thing. I had, for some reason, I had this stress response that released all these stress hormones in my body. I was like, whoa, what the heck is that? Right.
sure.
So I know from a lot of experience that, the mind game is first, right? Because if I start thinking, oh no, right?
Yeah, that's a
I'm
quick
in
spiral.
trouble, right?
Yes,
Um, if I started beating myself up on the spot, I knew that was only going to perpetuate the stress hormones.
correct.
So it's like, okay, neutral mind. I'll beat myself up later. Right now, like, just meditate, right? So I was literally mantra. I'm like, just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving, right? And so my elbow's opening up. And, all of this, it feels like it's taking an hour, right? But it's really only a minute for me to
Sure.
regain the full use of my arms. Okay, that happens. I'm like, right, done, moving on. But for some reason, I could not feel the music. And it
In the
freaked,
So in the same performance, you went from a physical block to a mental block.
freaked me out.
Oh, I would imagine.
My colleagues, so it was a string quartet. There's, me and the other three. You should have seen, they were looking over the music stands with wide eyes. I was like, oh my gosh, they can't hear me. I'm not playing, enough, right?
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, okay, now that means the audience really can't hear the melody either. So yeah, that was the day that I realized I couldn't take flow for granted.
Okay.
I I was sitting on the couch that night, really feeling humiliated. Like my job security and reputation are now at stake, right? That
Mhm,
thing that
mhm.
I was infallible about. Keep in mind, um, I did not use any alcohol or drugs to get into flow at all. And I know it's a great entry point for a lot of people.
I would think that that inhibits you from being or distracts you from getting into
Now, I
flow.
think a lot of people use it to relax themselves to get
Interesting.
there. And, a lot of my colleagues in college when they were auditioning were taking beta blockers and, things to keep yourself from getting too nervous and all that stuff, right? Anyways, that's the night I sat down and figured out, how do I get into flow? And I reverse engineered it. And ever since then, um, I have taken that body of knowledge. And now I do professional speaking, and that funny looking violin behind me now is an electric violin. I don't teach anymore, don't play in an orchestra anymore. I do keynote speaking
Right.
um, for a lot of corporations, and I'm teaching them how to get into their work the way a musician gets into the music. And I'm showing
Right.
them,
And I've seen some of those speeches. It's really quite something.
oh,
You
thank you.
engage the entire audience. I saw one where you did a clapping exercise with the audience,
Yes.
and that was exceptional. And I could see how that would resonate with people. And before we go any further, you wrote a book. It's called Flow.
Oh, look at that.
Look
There
at
it
that.
is.
Flow, unlock your genius, love what you do.
Yep.
So you were a concert master of an orchestra, you were teaching violin, you had a moment that led you to look for a way to understand flow so that you could harness it for your benefit.
Yes.
How does that transition happen so that today you no longer are a concert violinist, you
Yeah.
no longer are a violin teacher, but you still use the violin in your presentations
Right.
often?
Right.
So
So,
tell us a little bit about that transition,
oh
if you would.
gosh, it was a really dark time in my life. So I I recently heard there's a name for it. It's called a polycrisis. Polycrisis is when you have different crises. That's a funny thing to say, crisis. Different, I don't know how to say the
Crises.
plural. Crises, is
Crises.
that the
Yeah,
plural?
that is.
Different of crises happening at the same time that don't relate to each other, but because they're happening at the same time, they end up exacerbating each other.
Mhm. Compounding effect.
Yeah. So, I had 3 things going on. My mom had Alzheimer's. She needed a
Oh, I'm
lot of
sorry.
help. My son, he was at the height of his teenage rebellion. It was kind of like the scariest time for a parent, you know, to not have control over what was going on. Um, and then, I I was literally on stage playing a Beethoven symphony, and I was not feeling the music, and I thought, "Okay, this has nothing to do with getting into flow at this point, like, I am not feeling it." I took a year's leave from the orchestra to see if I could figure it out. During that time, my violin students started leaving me. Clearly, I was just in this funk, right? There was a lot
Yeah.
of things happening at once. It's really confusing to figure out what was going on. My first thought was, I guess I'm done with the violin. And had fallen in love with public speaking, a few years prior. So I'm like, okay, so I'll focus on that. Dealing with my son, dealing with my mom, sold my gorgeous antique violin.
Oh,
Gosh, sold it. It was so beautiful. I sold all my music. I sold everything. I was done. Um, so fast forward a few years, and I was at a film festival, and we're watching a documentary about a group of counterculture artists who are questioning everything. If you are familiar with Meow Wolf, it's a series of museums called Meow Wolf. And these people were the originators of this museum concept. They were questioning, who's to say this is art? Who's to say this is not art? Who's to say this art's valuable? This art's not valuable? Who's to say that if we're going to run a museum, we have to have leaders, right? Aren't we all leaders? I mean, they were just, you know, questioning everything.
mhm.
And it was so riveting. I was like, ooh, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And for some reason, in the middle of the night, I felt the power of the violin coming on stage with me again. So that morning, I called my friend Janet, who was on stage with me the day that my elbows froze, to see if she had a violin I could borrow. And if you know Janet, of course she does. And of course, the violin she has, it's purple. So she shows up with the purple violin. I played some Bach, and it's like, no. And then I played Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. I'm like, yeah. And that was the day I learned that I wasn't done playing the violin. I was done with classical music.
Interesting.
I hardly listen to it anymore. I'm so oversaturated with it. I
Yeah.
really it has just become and some it is so it's old, you know? I mean, hundreds of years old, right?
Yeah.
And it's like preserving history, right? And I don't relate to it anymore. I really and I it was so confusing,
I
right?
imagine you've
So
devoted your life to it up to that point.
so confusing. So a week after I got the purple violin, I borrowed an electric. And then I started literally 6 weeks later, I was at a speaking engagement with this borrowed electric violin, playing some loops, playing my own music, right? And incorporating it with the speaking without any elbows freezing. So it was a very linear process to get to being a concertmaster of an orchestra. From the time everything fell apart to saying goodbye to the orchestra, saying goodbye to the teaching, right? Going through that process. saying goodbye to all of that. Like I call it the giant suck forward because it felt like I was being pulled forward. It was like, oh, I feel the power of the violin coming back. Okay, let's try this electric thing. Oh, I'm writing my own music. Oh, I'm doing it with the speaking, right? It was like it was pulling me forward.
Right.
I was following the breadcrumbs, right? It was very different than a linear process, right?
Right
And
on.
uh anyways, the thing is that when I was 15 years old, when I was saying, "Oh, maybe I should look into music therapy," I actually have a very vivid memory of a time when I was in my room listening to a violin concerto, and in my imagination, it was as if I was the soloist and I was the one pouring the core of my soul into every note I play. And and I was really having a really, really, really deep flow experience just in the listening and imagining and all that. And for some reason, I've remembered that for all these years. And I was on this podcast interview with a colleague of mine who's also a public speaker. And he's like summarizing at the end of the podcast. He says, "Okay, Diane, so clearly you're not 15 in your room blasting the music anymore. And after 28 years, you're done teaching violin. You don't even play in an orchestra anymore, but you do speak, which means you do stand center stage. You're the only one on stage. And you pour the core of your soul into every note you play and every word you say." And he says, "From where I sit, it certainly looks like you've become the soloist."
Huh.
Blew my mind. I never saw it. But yet, I knew when I was 15 years old what that would feel like. And it's exactly what it feels like as I'm speaking to you now and as I'm speaking to you on audiences. It is that seed was always in me. And the problem when we have flow state moments is when we have those ideas and insights come in from out of the blue, what do? We're like, oh, that's unrealistic. That's
Right.
a
You
pipe dream.
dismiss it.
It's
Exactly.
a daydream. Right,
Right.
we dismiss it, we brush it under the rug. But
Hmm.
that day when Tyler pointed it out to me, connected the dots that I couldn't see,
Right.
I realized that to have these flow experiences, to really experience what you are truly capable of, and to not dismiss it. Yes, it doesn't look like that anymore. It looks very different. I'm
Hmm.
speaking, I'm performing, right? Combining violin, writing my own music, right? Playing electric, right? That looks way different than my 15-year-old vision. But the nugget is the exact same. And that's why, um, you know, I would encourage any people who are listening to this, how do you know when you're in flow? You lose sense of time, you lose sense of self. Ideas and insights are coming in from out of the blue. Things are coming together with a sense of ease, like those days you get more done in 30 minutes than you had in the last 3 days. You
Right.
know, you're in this positive feedback loop where the more you get into it, the more you get out of it. And there's a mental health component to it. Flow is under the umbrella of positive psychology. And when you're in flow, you are experiencing more meaning, joy, and fulfillment in everything
Mm.
that you do when you're in flow. And so when you think of those times when you're experiencing those key indicators, don't dismiss it. Nurture whatever that experience is,
Mm.
because that's really showing you like a really unique part of yourself. And that's why when I teach about flow education, how do you uniquely get into flow is to know um, your own unique thing that makes you tick, your own secret sauce, right?
Sure.
That thing that really moves you.
Sure. And you teach corporate groups. What else do you do to spread the word about all that you've learned about flow? How does your professional life today manifest itself?
Well, it's been a blast doing all these podcasts with my book release. So the book is a great way to get it out, all this information out there. The book goes much more in depth than my speaking engagements do. But keep in mind, I'm a performer, right? And getting on stage, that's where I want to be the most.
Sure.
And yes, I could do coaching. Yes, I could do training. No problem. But I'm going to want to spend the majority of my time as much as I can, on stage.
You play violin every day still?
Almost.
And what do you play when you play just for your own edification?
Yeah, well, I was just talking to my husband about that. I need a little something else. I have some warm-ups that I do. I have to maintain, the physical aspect of it, right? And I do play with a Boss RC500 looping station. I've got an octave pedal. I have a switch so that I can go to different memories on my looping station.
Right.
Um, my husband wanted to know what I wanted for holiday gifts this year, and I was like, "Oh, get me some new pedals. Maybe I could sound like a different instrument or something." And he'll geek out on that because he's a bass player, right? And there's somebody I know who just released a looping course for violinists, and I will be taking that. I think that'll be what I'm going to do and see if I
Okay.
can, get some new ideas. But I do play Bach a little bit every day, but that's the only classical music that I'm playing.
Yeah, I saw another one of your videos where you did 4 different lines of a single piece using your looping station, and it's so subtle how you transition from one section to the next. I thought that you were very capable already with the looping station. I don't know. It was very good. I was very impressed.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
There's this thing called prepared piano because the piano is a percussive instrument. It's considered a percussive instrument, and there is things that you could do to the piano, like you could put things inside the strings, and you can, put. I don't know exactly what they do. I've played music with prepared piano, but they do something to the piano where it can do all different kinds of sound effects. And
Mhm.
it turns out that John Cage was writing a lot of experimental music back in the 60s and 70s. And there was this pianist who helped him create and codify prepared piano stuff. And his son lives here in Bend, Oregon. This guy's a musical genius. I just heard him play 3 hours of nonstop looping and giant pedal board. He just sat down. He never even got up to use the bathroom or get a drink of water. For 3 hours straight, he just played song after song after song. His dad was there, his dad's a legend. And that's another gift that I asked my husband for. I said, maybe I can take some lessons with Blake. His name's Blake Lowry.
Okay. Let's get that to happen. I want to hear what you do after that.
Yeah, I get some juices flowing.
For anyone who's out there who's interested in learning more about flow, first of all, the book very easy to read and understand. It's not a complex book. The ideas seem obvious once you read them. I realize, oh, that makes perfect sense. I get that, but I never put it together. So go
Yeah.
out, check out this book. You have a website. I'm going to have some links in the episode information that you've provided for me so that if people are interested, they can find out more about your work and about you. I have one other question. Have you ever been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Yeah. It's
So,
been a long time. And it
yeah.
was it was near the beginning of when they first opened it. But yeah,
Did you like it?
absolutely. Yeah. It was really cool.
Yeah. I can't
Yeah.
wait. I'm dying to go. I've never been.
Oh yeah. You have to go.
It
Um,
may be the first thing on my bucket list that the next thing that I need to do.
Yeah, they've revitalized all of downtown Cleveland. There's a lot
Hmm.
to do down there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you'll have a great trip.
Can't wait. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have or that you'd like the audience to know about?
Oh, just would love to leave you with my quote, which is get into your life like a musician gets into the music.
I love it. Diane, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really excited to be able to share your story with the audience and great, just getting to know you a little bit has been such a pleasure. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
And that is it for today's conversation. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next Tuesday. And if you like what you heard today, we'd appreciate it if you would subscribe or follow to make sure you get notified about every new episode. And please tell your friends. Also, a reminder that we release a playlist for every episode. This one will be a little bit different, but well worth a listen. So look for the Rock and Roll Show podcast playlist on Spotify every week, featuring songs that we talked about today. Additionally, we want to know what you think, so please leave us a comment and we'll try to respond to every one of them. The Rock and Roll Show podcast is a World Highway Media production. I'm your host, Alex Gadd, and until next time, remember that life is short, so get those concert tickets.